to begin by thanking our witnesses for your service and for your testimony today. We'll try not to beat you up too much. And I thank Ranking Member Sullivan, who will be arriving shortly, for his continued bipartisan cooperation. Today we will hear about the Defense Department and the service's commitment to our service members and their families, as well as how our military installations project power around the world. These priorities are vital to our readiness, but I do worry that the department's actions are not in line with its stated goals. So funding for our installations and facilities rarely receive the commitment in funding or resources from the department when compared to other accounts like procurement and R&D. This disparity has only grown in recent years, further exacerbating our construction and maintenance backlogs. Facility funding backlogs are compounding every year, with communities in Hawaii and across the country paying the price. When our installations don't get the funding they need, we end up facing crises like the fuel spill at Red Hill and Haleakala, the power outages at Schofield Barracks, the wastewater spills into Pearl Harbor, and the list goes on for facilities around the country and indeed the world. Not only do these failures damage our forces' readiness, they undermine the trust and faith of the surrounding community. Our service members and our communities deserve better. Further, while we repeatedly hear the department talk about keeping up with the pacing threat of China in the Indo-Pacific, we have yet to see the department make the facility investments necessary to do so. Instead, this committee has had to significantly increase the number of military construction projects above what has come over in recent budget requests. In addition to failing to invest in new projects, we are also failing to maintain existing facilities. The deferred maintenance backlog for DoD facilities is significant and grows each year. While the department's stated goal is to meet 90% of the existing requirements, it has recently only budgeted up to 80%, requiring Congress to step in and raise questions about the department's commitment to addressing the backlog. The department must get serious with a facilities plan and maintenance plan backed by adequate resources to make it achievable. Elsewhere on our installations, the hazards of privatized housing remain persistent. The department must step up its oversight and vastly improve the quality of its government-owned enlisted barracks as well. Today, we will focus on the challenges that still remain and what DoD can do to address them. I want to especially thank Elizabeth Field with the GAO for her ongoing work on barracks improvements, and I look forward to her testimony on her findings. Finally, I look forward to hearing more about how the department is investing in operational energy to improve combat capability for our troops. And I would like to know how the department is planning for more resilient designs in our military construction projects, under what specific timelines DoD will update its guidance, and what resources are needed to accomplish this. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on these important issues and what more this committee and the department can do to strengthen our military installations in Hawaii and around the world. When Senator Sullivan arrives, he can put a statement into the record. So today we are joined by the Honorable Brendan Owens, who is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy, Installations, and Environment. The Honorable Rachel Jacobson, Assistant Secretary of the Army for Energy, Installations, and Environment. The Honorable Meredith Berger, Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, Installations, and Environment. The Honorable Ravi Chandra, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Energy, Installations, and Environment. So we have not only the DoD, but all of the services present today. Thank you. And then Elizabeth Field, Director, Defense Capabilities and Management, GAO. We will start with Secretary Owens.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hirono. Ranking Member Sullivan, when you get here. Distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of myself and my military department colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the President's fiscal year 24 budget for the department's energy, installations, and environment programs. I look forward to working with you in the coming months to continue aligning our policies and resources to support the National Defense Strategy. The 2022 NDS is clear. We are operating in an increasingly complex global threat environment characterized by significant geopolitical, technological, economic, and environmental challenge. The People's Republic of China remains the department's pacing challenge, with its increasingly aggressive efforts to undermine U.S. alliances and security partnerships in the Indo-Pacific region. We also face threats from actors like Russia, North Korea, and Iran, as well as climate change and other transboundary challenges. Together, these threats not only pressure the joint forces' power projection and maneuver capabilities, but also put the safety and security of the homeland at risk. Countering these threats requires a resilient joint force and defense ecosystem that can operate in contested environments at home and abroad. As such, we are ensuring that our installations and infrastructure are resilient to a wide range of challenges by implementing policy updates, innovation in how we plan, design, and build, and deployment of technology to counter the diversifying threats we face. In the Indo-Pacific specifically, there are two key priorities that will be critical to the success of this effort: retaining vital mission capabilities in the state of Hawaii.
Mr. Secretary, I'm sorry to interrupt. I should have mentioned that we are needing to observe some time constraint, and so I would appreciate it if all of you could do your remarks in 3 minutes instead of the usual 5. I'd appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Please continue.
My countdown clock is now 2 minutes, so when 3 minutes left, I'll be done, or work to do it. Thank you. So Indo-Pacific specifically, in Hawaii and Guam and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, so that they remain on track by extending the exemption of the H-2B visa temporary need requirement through 2029. More broadly, we are requesting $14.7 billion in the budget for military construction across the department, which is an increase of 44% from last year's request. In addition, we are requesting $3.5 billion for installation energy and $3.3 billion for operational energy to enhance resilience and reduce demand to improve joint lethality, support distributed operations, and reduce sustainment risks in contested environments. We are also improving our approach to facility management to increase the efficacy of the $20 billion we are requesting for sustainment, restoration, and modernization investments. These efforts will enhance our facilities' direct mission support capabilities. They will also enhance the health, well-being, and readiness of our service members and their families. We remain committed to maintaining a robust environmental cleanup program, improving the safety and efficiency of our facilities, and improving the quality of life for our military personnel and their families by ensuring access to safe, quality, and affordable housing. So while we implement new technology to avert future risk, we are requesting $1.5 billion to support cleanup efforts intended to safeguard the health and well-being of our people. Finally, the department continues to focus on ensuring that service members have access to safe, quality, affordable family and unaccompanied housing. We are requesting $1.9 billion for family housing to sustain our increased focus on ensuring the delivery and maintenance of quality housing for military families, an additional $463 million to modernize unaccompanied personnel housing to improve privacy and provide greater amenities. Nothing is more important than our people, our soldiers, sailors, airmen and Marines, guardians, and their families. The investments we make to improve the built and natural environments where they live and work are our investments that pay off by improving their health and well-being. We appreciate Congress's and this subcommittee's continued support for these efforts, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Secretary Jacobson.
Chairman Hirono and Ranking Member Sullivan as he arrives, and the distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on Army readiness. I'm grateful to the committee for its continued support and for its commitment to Army soldiers, families, civilians, and soldiers for life. Installations are at the epicenter of everything we do in the Army. They're the core of our Army readiness. To realize Army's 2030 readiness goals, the future of installations must be now. Installations are where we train, work, learn, and live. To strengthen Army's readiness and build the force of the future, we must be laser-focused on providing state-of-the-art resilient installations. We must keep moving forward. A focus on readiness is reflected in our budget request for fiscal year '24. Significantly, our budget request plus future planned funding includes critical investments in the Indo-Pacific region. Quality barracks and housing are essential to readiness. I'm pleased to report that with the help of Congress, we are continuing our investments in barracks with over $1 billion a year planned over in the next decade. We are building on congressional directives to deliver high-quality family housing and strengthen our oversight of the private housing providers. We are conducting comprehensive inspections of 100% of privatized housing, and we are conducting financial audits of the entire program. Most important, we are making sure residents' concerns are heard and responded to promptly, and we are mindful of the recommendations in the recent GAO report, and we will address them expeditiously. A key component of readiness is improving our infrastructure and tackling our deferred maintenance backlog. These challenges require strategic spending to slow the progression of deteriorating facilities. We are grateful to Congress for increasing funding for facilities sustainment, restoration, and modernization in fiscal year '23. This funding will slow the pace of facility degradation. Our FY24 budget request seeks to continue this momentum. Resilient installations foster ready soldiers, beginning with reliable access to energy. We have all witnessed threats to the electric grid, whether from cyber attacks, physical attacks, or severe weather events. Installations can't afford to lose power when the commercial grid goes down. That is why we are developing on-site carbon-free power generation, battery storage, and a microgrid to support critical missions at all Army installations. Thanks to congressional authorities, we are collaborating with third parties to guarantee energy resilience without the need for upfront expenditures by the Army. The Army bears responsibility for cleaning up pollution at current and former Army sites. We are taking our obligations to address PFAS seriously and in a transparent manner. We appreciate the certainty that will result from EPA's ongoing Safe Drinking Water Act rulemaking, and the Army will be ready to comply once the regulation is final. As we invest in installations to support the Army of the future, we must use cutting-edge technologies, innovative public-private partnership, and streamlined processes to accelerate result. Each of these investments will help us recruit and retain soldiers and families. And importantly, these investments will improve the quality of life, which will pay future dividends in immeasurable ways. Thank you for your continued support of our soldiers, families, civilians, and Soldiers for Life. I look forward to your questions.
Oh, that's okay, Madam Chair. No, that's all right.
Chairman Hirono, Ranking Member Sullivan, and distinguished members, thank you for the opportunity today. And thank you for the inclusion of the Fallon Range Training Modernization in the NDAA in 2023. We remain committed to the important commitment that you've made there. I'll return to Fallon this weekend to celebrate Earth Day with our tribal partners as we approach our first milestone under the modernization. Thank you for your attention to Red Hill. We're ensuring drinking water continues to be safe, and once the Joint Task Force certifies that it has been defueled, the Navy is prepared to execute the permanent closure of that facility. I'll return to Hawaii next week to continue my focus on the health and safety of the people, environment, and communities in Oahu. In my portfolio, my work spans 3 cross-cutting areas: critical infrastructure, communities, and climate action. Critical infrastructure, as you noted, Madam Chairman, is the means to our ends. Worldwide, Navy and Marine Corps installations are power projection platforms from which naval forces train, deploy, and maintain our forward presence. They're also where our people recover, resupply, and rest. They're home to service members and their families. Historically, the department has accepted significant risk in the resourcing of naval installations. This year's budget represents a first step in fundamentally changing that approach. We're developing a 30-year infrastructure plan that will design and deliver the requirements and resources to support the mission set of our naval installations: warfighting, readiness, and quality of life. This budget request supports new platforms and weapon systems, modernizes aging utilities, demolishes obsolete facilities, and enhances the quality of life for sailors and Marines. Additionally, you'll see our commitment to the Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Program, SIOP, and our focus in the Indo-Pacific region and the commitments that we have made there. To keep these commitments, the Department of Defense does need a stable workforce in Guam through long-term relief from the H-2B visa requirement through at least 2029. Next, communities, where our people come together. Your districts, our installations, and the environment, economy, and people that connect us. This budget request sustains our enhanced oversight of privatized housing and continues our proactive environmental stewardship of installations and ranges. It supports the Department of Defense's comprehensive approach to address PFAS and other emerging chemicals of concern. The Department of the Navy protects our communities and critical infrastructure with a third C, climate action. No matter what we call it, extreme weather, temperatures, a rising sea, and depleting water sources are threatening our installations and the infrastructure that supports our critical missions. This budget request makes Navy and Marine Corps installations, our power projection platforms, more resilient and survivable. And it makes our forward deployed forces have the operational advantage by untethering them from long and contested logistics tails. I'd like to thank this committee for your steadfast commitment to our sailors, Marines, civilians, and their families, and I look forward to continuing to work with you to make our Marine Corps and Navy the world's greatest maritime fighting force. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Secretary Chaudhary, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Absolutely, Chairwoman.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Absolutely. Chairwoman Hirono, Ranking Member Sullivan, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Department of the Air Force energy, installations, and environment programs. In just the opening weeks since coming on board at the department, I've seen countless examples of the dedication and devotion of our airmen and guardians, and I remain clear-eyed on their support and devotion and their families and the critical missions they execute. In the Department of the Air Force, our installations are the platforms from which we project combat power. Nearly every DAF mission starts and ends on an installation. DAF installations also serve as key nodes in a global network that ensures joint force mission success around the world. For nearly 80 years, we've operated our installations with unprecedented freedom of action. Yet, our nation faces complex security challenges, most notably the rise of great power competition with China and Russia. Today's reality is that our installations are no longer a sanctuary. We must ensure they're resilient and ready to deter aggression, and if that fails, be prepared to win decisively. In the face of these challenges, we prioritized our efforts to deter aggressive competitors and their intent on shaping the security environment. To accomplish this, the DAF remains focused on 7 operational imperatives, which includes ensuring resilient forward basing and bed down of critical weapon systems. In support of these imperatives, the DAF Military Construction Program continues to prioritize our nuclear triad and combatant command infrastructure, including one of the largest investments in the Indo-Pacific and Europe in 20 years. Furthermore, we remain ever committed to the quality of life of our service members and their families through investments in housing, dormitories, and child development centers. Nothing is more important than the health and safety of our service members and their families. As a former military member myself, no issue is more personal than this one. My lived experiences on our installations over the course of 2 decades of service anchors my passion and commitment in this arena. On this month of the military child, I'm committed to having our families' backs just as they have ours, with the largest investment in dormitories in over a decade, with more oversight on privatized housing, and elimination of our backlog on CDC projects, with 11 more designs in the works. But there's more work to be done. We also fund highly innovative operational installation energy initiatives which increase our readiness and provide more combat capability, as multiple energy sources that ruggedize our bases and reduce vulnerabilities. As a former Air Force pilot, I spent most of my career understanding one thing: energy is life. Learning to manage, conserve, and discharge energy in order to be decisive is critical to ensuring victory when needed. In this vein, I remain committed to accelerating our power projection capabilities and delivering operational energy at the point of effect for theater commanders. Like many of our airmen and guardians, I believe that operational and installational energy could prove to be the margin of victory in the Pacific if needed. In the DAF, we can no longer afford to move at the speed of government. Rather, our airmen and guardians are moving at the speed of imagination, with game-changing technologies that will shape this decade and beyond. In the midst of great power competition, we recognize that this is an endeavor in which we dare not come in second place. As such, we appreciate the continued partnership and leadership from Congress to ensure air and space forces are ready to deter aggression, and if called upon, fly, fight, and win decisively. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairwoman Hirono, Ranking Member Sullivan, Senators Shaheen and Kane, and other distinguished members and staff of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on GAO's work regarding DoD's management of its infrastructure and environmental challenges. I would like to briefly offer 3 points. First, the significant challenges that DoD faces in this area require urgent attention because they are, in many, if not most cases, on track to worsen in coming years. Chairwoman Hirono, you eloquently spoke about the deferred maintenance backlog of $137 billion, which is only compounding, so I won't belabor that point. GAO has made a number of recommendations to address DoD's infrastructure and environmental challenges, including for the department to improve data reliability, strengthen internal oversight, and report more transparent information to Congress and the public. Implementing these recommendations should make tackling these challenges easier, but by no means does that mean it will be easy. Which brings me to my second point. Improving DoD's financial management practices should be part of this conversation. DoD's deferred maintenance backlog equates to roughly 1/7 of its total budget. Department officials responsible for reducing the backlog will point to limited resources as one of the biggest problems they face. That is absolutely a fair point, and it is a challenge that is not easily addressed. But some relief could come through better management of resources. GAO has found that each year, DoD doesn't obligate and eventually returns to the U.S. Treasury billions of dollars in operation and maintenance funding, the same type of funding that can be used to fund facility sustainment. By improving its financial management practices, including by continuing to work toward achieving a clean opinion on the financial audit, DoD can better budget for and use its resources where they are needed. My third and final point is simply to underscore what I think we all agree on and have said today, which is that the resource needs and challenges we are talking about are fundamentally about people. When we conducted our review of DoD's deferred maintenance backlog, we found that the facilities that are so often the first to lose out on funding are the ones most directly tied to quality of life. Barracks where junior enlisted service members live, for example, or child care centers. The effects of this are clear. In discussion groups we have held at military installations around the country, service members have consistently told us that the condition of their housing, whether government-owned or privatized, impacts their perception of the military, and in some cases their decision on whether to re-enlist. As one young soldier said to us, if we get the bare minimum in the barracks, the Army will get the bare minimum from us. The readiness implications of this problem are, I think, obvious. That concludes my statement, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I'll start the questioning. For all of our witnesses, the Department of Defense has a troubling pattern of not adequately funding modernization and required infrastructure as noted. The results of this continued negligence are broken water pipes, electric grid outages, hazardous spills, and damage to the environment. By the way, what happened at Red Hill impacted over 90,000 people. 90,000. That's a lot of people. Thousands of them had to be moved outside of military housing, Navy housing, and into hotels and other places. So over the last few years, Hawaii in particular has borne the brunt of the impact of this underinvestment, in my view. So for the panel, how do each of you plan to invest in the DoD's often forgotten infrastructure? And as noted by Ms. Field, that a lot of this, yes, you can point to scarce resources, but as she noted, that it's the use of the resources. You can better manage the resources you currently have. So for each of you, what can you do better with what you have that will address the deferred maintenance issues? We'll start with Mr. Owen, Secretary Owens.
Thank you, Senator Hirono, and thank you for linking underinvestment in infrastructure to concrete examples of the risks that we take when we do that. We are in the beginning of a transition to a new way to address FSRM. We've requested funding to accelerate the implementation of an enterprise sustainment management system that is going to give us the ability to change the way that we manage facilities going forward. And what I mean by that is we have taken an approach that the way that we should sustain our facilities is by calculating the total number of dollars that's required based on a percentage of the plant replacement value. And while that might have served DOD in the past, I don't think that's a way ahead that's sustainable. We've got a backlog that is paralyzingly large, and we have a method of calculating funding that is not aligned with the way that buildings fail, because buildings don't fail linearly. They fail in sort of episodic functions over the course of time in a downward degradation. And if you allow that degradation to begin, you never get those buildings back up to what they were or what they should have been again, without a major recapitalization. And that's not a linear thing. It's a capital reinvestment strategy. So the sustainment management system that we are developing and will be implementing is something that I think that the Marines have done a very good job of understanding, that facilities optimization is not a total pounds of dollars game. It's much more about how we look at recapitalization over time, and then at a high level making sure that we have the sustainment of facilities so that the degradation doesn't begin.
Do the rest of you agree with the Secretary Owen's description of how the approach should be changed so that you are able to address this huge backlog, ever-growing backlog? Secretary Jacobson. Well, I'd like each of you to respond briefly as you can, if you are changing the way you're doing things.
As Senator Hirono, the question is an excellent one. I agree with what Secretary Owens just said. What we have to do is improve our planning and improve our assessment of the need. So it's not just necessarily the age of a building, it's what are the facilities within that building, what's their condition, what is the use of that building right now, and are we making the best use of it? So we have to make sure we're planning and making sure that those plans reflect accurately our assessment of need. We have so many facilities and buildings within Army that it's a very hard thing to get a hold of, but we are trying that. We're improving our facilities investment planning, which then in turn helps us understand better how to rank our projects and our needs. But we also, sustainment is so important to prevent the degradation, and we're making the best use of those sustainment dollars.
I am running out of time, excuse me.
Sorry.
So particularly for Secretary of Field, the DOD the Marine Corps, I should say, is only requesting funding for 54% of its FSRM program. And that's this year, and it was just 56% last year. And it seems like the department is playing a game of chicken, hoping that Congress will correct the issue. How can you justify such a shortfall in this funding? Now, that's as to Ms. Berger, and before we get to Secretary Chatterberry, I would like to ask Ms. Field that as we are sitting here being told that they are going to change how they use the resources, I would ask the GAO to the word monitor comes to mind, to tell us if you actually see improvements to how they're managing their resources. So Ms. Berger, and then we'll go to Mr. Chatterberry.
Chairwoman, to your point on the Marine Corps, I'll pick up where Secretary Owens made a quick reference to the Marine Corps approach, and it's different, and it does result in some lower sustainment percentages than you would be used to seeing. This is something called the readiness maximization tool. It's a deviation from the traditional percentage that you would see things funded towards, but what it does is it looks at the whole pile of the FSRM money that is there, and puts a little money towards sustainment where it will actually sustain, allowing more money to go towards the restoration and modernization parts of that pile of funding, so that there's more good money going towards good, so towards the facilities that count more, as my colleagues were talking about. This is a tool that we are looking at, learning from it. It is a tool that informs the way the decisions are made, but it will help us as we think about the 30-year infrastructure plan that I mentioned in my opening, to make sure that we are aligning the best dollars in the best places, so we're putting those appropriated dollars where they count, and then aligning risk, mission assurance, all of the other considerations, so that we have a holistic approach that anticipates what we need in this look like we would fund another platform.
So are you saying that while the percentage looks really low, that you are addressing the needs in a more, critical, or as you say, holistic way, and that should give you better results? And so that is the Navy. Air Force?
Thank you, Chair Hirono. I could sum it up in 3 words: strategy, strategy, strategy. We have launched an installation investment plan, installation investment strategy, which launched in 2019, and we're getting ready to refresh that. And what that does is going to take a look at what our right size is going to be and what type of facilities need to go away to scale and start getting at this maintenance issue. One of the areas that I want to focus in on, I can give you an example of, is in our unaccompanied housing, and we've had a lot of discussion on that. But currently, we have launched a dormitory master plan to take a look at what our program schedule is going to be to do that. And what we found when we did that is that we need to invest a lot more. Not hard to discern, but right now we're targeting to correct that $1.7 billion in FSRM from FY22 to 26, and that's a 4-fold increase. So we've identified it, characterized it, and now we're putting in the right investments to get us to where we need to be.
Thank you, Ms. Field. Just very briefly, since the services are making these kinds of changes, and I hope, as I said, that you will be able to assess whether or not they are better utilizing the resources that they have been provided. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Assistant Secretary Berger, I'm concerned about the priorities that the Navy has right now. With all due respect to the obsession on climate change, the Secretary had a disastrous hearing in front of the full committee yesterday. Disastrous. So he goes to the Bahamas and makes it that states to the world climate change is one of his top priorities, and it clearly seems to be. His climate action plan was released before his 30-year shipbuilding plan. Yesterday, I took him, and so did several other senators, to task for not even producing a plan to produce 31 amphib ships, which is required by law. He looked at the Armed Services Committee and said, essentially, he's not going to do it. That's not going to fly. Let him know that, by the way. It's not going to fly. The U.S. Congress told him the number of ships he has to maintain and produce. That's in our constitutional responsibilities right here in the Senate, and he was ignoring us, right? But he sure does a lot on climate change. It's a real unbelievable focus in the wrong area. The Chinese military is not worried about climate change. It is worried about shipbuilding, hypersonics, and conducting a successful military invasion of Taiwan. Russia is not worried about climate change. It's worried about pushing its aggression deeper into Ukraine, and yet we have a secretary who's releasing his climate action plan before he does anything on shipping. It's remarkable. It's outrageous. And the only one who is excited about it is Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. Let me go into some of your climate change action plan. You're going to get to 100% zero-emission vehicles by 2035, including 100% zero-emission light-duty vehicle acquisition by 2027. Is that including the Marine Corps? And is that remotely possible? I'm pretty sure the answer is no, but that's in your plan. Can you speak to that?
Senator Sullivan, climate change is a threat to our installations and the investments that we make.
You think it was smart to get the climate action plan out before the 30-year shipbuilding plan out for the U.S. Navy? Was that a good use of priorities?
One of the primary responses that amphibious ships provide are to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief.
No, you didn't answer my question. Answer my question, respectfully. Did it make sense from the priority of the U.S. Navy to get your climate action plan out before you got your 30-year shipbuilding plan out? Is that a good prioritization of what the Navy stands for in our national defense?
Ranking Member Sullivan, my responsibilities center on this portfolio, which does not include shipbuilding, and so I'd leave that to the Secretary's response.
Okay, that's an okay response.
But where I do focus on the mission readiness of our sailors and Marines, and so I do think that climate change is a threat that we need to be ready for. That includes threats to our energy infrastructure, as you noted.
Okay, what about my question on 2027 for vehicles in the Marine Corps? Is that remotely doable?
We are on a track to make sure that we are acquiring vehicles, and the reason that we are doing that is to be untethered from logistics tails. You noted Russia. Russia uses energy as both a tool and a weapon.
But is that remotely doable 4 years from now?
We are on a track, and we are working along with our sister services to make sure that we are acquiring electric vehicles that are able to support all of our mission sets. And so through partnership, yes, sir, I think that we are on a track.
Another thing in your climate plan is to have the entire Navy achieve net zero emissions by 2050. What's the statutory basis of that goal?
We have set a goal. I don't think there needs to be a statutory basis.
There is none, by the way, just for everybody's. There's no statutory basis in any law to achieve net zero by 2050. Let me turn to you, Mr. Assistant Secretary Chowdhury. We have a significant buildup of the Air Force and the Army in Alaska. 100 fifth-gen fighters at Eielson and J-Bear, the new, and this is for Assistant Secretary Jacobson as well, the new 11th Airborne Division throughout the state. It gets very cold in Alaska. We're going to need significant supplies of energy. Can you commit to me and this committee to work with me on different opportunities for energy to power these bases, including natural gas, including our abundance of oil that can turn into jet fuel, which we need very significantly with regard to the energy needs in Alaska?
Ranking Member Sullivan, I can commit to you to do that. I think we need to work together to come up with a diverse set of options to make sure we're meeting our operational needs in the Pacific. The strategic importance of JBER is, it goes without saying, it is that critical. So having a diverse capability of energy supplies is going to be critical. More broadly, I think redundancy is going to be key as well, because as we understand what the challenges are in this region, there are a number of logistic areas that we need to address. So absolutely, and I know we've committed to working on more innovative solutions than what you just described, including microgrids and opportunities at Eielson for nuclear and things like that of that sort. So yes, I commit to you.
I raised that in an EPW committee hearing today with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, all the commissioners, on what's happening at Eielson. I think it's exciting. Assistant Secretary Jacobson, do you have a view on that as well? Army's expanding in Alaska. 11th Airborne's doing great work, fantastic work, but we're going to need energy. It gets very cold. You know, Eielson gets 40, 50 below zero in the winter.
Ranking Member Sullivan, it's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Thank you for all of your support, and we're making significant investments in Alaska. Notably, to your point, we right now have a draft EIS to replace our coal-fired power plant at Wainwright with a gas plant, and I've expressed enormous interest in exploring nuclear energy in Alaska, and we're going to be watching very carefully what's happening at Eielson, because I believe it's a good option for us in Alaska and elsewhere. I want to look at small micronuclear reactors to power bases wherever it makes sense, particularly in remote locations where the energy challenges are as they are. I will be visiting Alaska in about 2 weeks.
Oh, good.
And I hope some of your staff, or maybe you will be there, and we can
Great.
say
Well,
hello.
we will coordinate. Good.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad you're coming up. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Madam Chair.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you all for being here. Ms. Fields, over the past several years, Congress has appropriated over $1 billion in funding for PFAS-related activities, including testing and remediation at more than 100 contaminated military sites across the country, including in New Hampshire at the former Pease Air Force Base, which is now National Guard Base. But from the perspective of oversight, do you think it would be helpful for the department to consolidate all of their PFAS-related funding requests into a single budget item to be submitted as part of the annual appropriations process?
Based on the work that we have done at GAO, I think we always welcome any way for the department to provide more transparent information about the total cost associated with PFAS cleanup. We conducted a review just a few years ago of anticipated costs associated with PFAS in groundwater, soil, and drinking water at or near current and former installations. At the time, the estimated cost of cleanup was around $1 or $2 billion. It's since gone up to $6 billion. And so that it's quite possible that that could provide greater transparency. I think the key question that we are focused on is how the department is thinking about the EPA's proposed rule that would lower the threshold for PFAS from 70 parts per trillion down to 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFAS. In the past, DOD cleaned up even when there was just an advisory. I'm not sure now that the department is preparing to clean up or is currently taking action to clean up, even though now there is a proposed rule.
Well, as you point out, the longer we delay, the more expensive this becomes. So, Secretary Owens, I actually have a question related to PFAS for you and probably for Secretary Chaudhry, because it has to do with the former Pease Air Force Base, which is now the National Guard site in New Hampshire. And I should say at the outset that the Air Force has been very helpful over the years since we first discovered PFAS in 2013 at working with the community on the cleanup. However, we now have an issue that's come up, and I'm extremely concerned, Secretary Owens, with the department's interpretation of Section 345A of the 2022 NDAA. It's a provision that was designed to increase transparency for PFAS testing with affected communities. Instead, the department has interpreted that provision as one that requires that they curtail data sharing. We worked, some of you may remember, in the last NDAA, we worked to try and address this. I had an amendment that was sponsored by the committee, which I was assured by DOD officials that that issue would be fixed as the result of that amendment. However, what we have seen in the last year is that DOD has walked back those assurances. The issue remains unchanged. It's become a real concern, not just for members living in the community who feel like they don't have access to information now, but also to the regulatory bodies in New Hampshire who don't have the information that they need. So do you have an update, or can you get us an update on this committee of what the department is planning to do to address this transparency issue?
Senator Shaheen, I will get you an update. I don't have one right now.
Okay. I hope the update comes with a commitment to work with us to address the underlying concern, because I see this as ongoing, and as we know, with over 700 sites around the country, this is an issue not just in New Hampshire, but it's going to be an issue everywhere.
I agree, and I think that the proposed regulatory action that EPA has put out is the type of forcing function that requires DOD to rethink what we've been doing. So we are taking steps in preparation for understanding that reduced level is coming, and in the process of doing that, we can also address the transparency questions that you have.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I also want to go back to Senator Sullivan's questions about the climate initiative and whether it's within the Navy or the Army or the Air Force, and I certainly support those initiatives. But I was talking with the National Guard Association in New Hampshire on Saturday, and one of the concerns that was raised to me by a member of the association was that he was worried that the effort to get us off of fossil fuels were going to leave some of our men and women in the military without the energy support they might need in case of conflict or other situations. Now, I tried to reassure him that there was nobody on the Armed Services Committee who was going to see that as a viable option. But can any of you address that concern, and how should we respond to people who raise that concern?
Senator Shaheen, I'll take that since the Air National Guard. Please tell to your constituent, I am not trading an ounce of thrust to sacrifice our national security. That being said, on the issue of what we need to do to make sure we're more resilient when we're making sure that we're taking care of our operational capabilities, demand reduction is going to be important going forward. We've got logistical challenges that are in the Pacific that we've got to address. And to me, I view this in the same light as I do any operational situation. As a former pilot, before you go fly, what's the first thing you do? You check the weather and make sure that you can adapt to any environment that you're in. So we've got to learn to adapt to this new environment, and please share and hopefully give some comfort to your constituent to let them know that we're going to stay focused on and be clear-eyed on our national security responsibilities.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Kane.
I'll just follow up and say I'm also a huge supporter of the military's efforts to combat climate change, both to make us more resilient, but also to deal with challenges I'm seeing in my own state. So the Hampton Roads area is next to New Orleans, second most vulnerable to sea level rise. We can't fix that immediately, but we can be part of a solution. And the resilience investments we're going to have to put in, just like raising roads to get into the base so that there can be access, are really expensive. And so I'm a supporter of the mission that you are embracing with respect to climate change. I will, though, weigh in with Senator Sullivan on the shipbuilding plan. And I have an assessment of what's going on, but I'm not happy with it.
Or the amphibs.
Yeah, and I'll use the amphibs as an example. We had a Sea Power hearing here on the 28th of March. It was noticed well in advance. We were told we'd get the shipbuilding plan before we hailed all the brass up here to ask them questions about it. We didn't have the plan, so we couldn't ask them questions about it, which was kind of a waste. We told them it would come in a day or two. And it didn't. And we got it 24 hours before the hearing with the Commandant, CNO, and SECNAV, which means most of us didn't really have a chance to look at it. And I can tell you why it was late. It was late because those parties who were going to deliver it to us didn't like what was in it. It's the president's budget, not the SECNAV's budget. And at the end of the day, the shipbuilding plan, I don't think, is really a reflection of what either the secretary or the commandant or the CNO want, because they've testified to us unequivocally. 31 amphibs is the number, and we've said 31 amphibs is the number, but Commandant Berger yesterday, he said, in this budget and this shipbuilding plan, there's no way to get to 31. He mentioned something else to me, which he didn't mention in the hearing. He said, you know, the only reason that we would be within sight of 31 has been Congress, because successive administrations have not asked for amphibs, and then Congress has added them in. And he was like, thank God for Congress, because we'd be at like 10 or 12 right now if it hadn't been for Congress doing this. So I think that the delay in getting us the shipbuilding plan, the inadequacy of the budget, is at a number of levels above even the high-ranking officials that we had us there yesterday. This is either at the SecDef level or in the White House in OMB. And Congress is going to do in the NDAA what we always do, which is if they're not asking for what we really believe is needed, then we do have the opportunity to fix it. But we were disappointed in that. And particularly for us, if we're supposed to have a hearing, and this is our one chance to talk to the CNO and the Commandant and the SECNAV until the next year in a hearing, and the important component is the shipbuilding plan. And one of my staffers got it before anybody else, and then had to share with everybody. Nobody had a chance to really review it and then meaningfully use our 5 minutes of question time to get what we needed. So that sends a message that's not a respectful one to committee members. That's not on y'all, but a lot of you folks are listening to us, and I hope that you may take this back. I would like to ask you, Secretary Owens, just on my Hampton Roads challenge, this sea level rise challenge. The good news in Hampton Roads is stakeholders, whether it's the different service branches or the Army Corps of Engineers or the local governments, the state governments, our port, there is a pretty good stakeholder group trying to work at this and figure out how to make investments so that we're not reducing our capacity at the largest Navy base in the world. Talk a little bit about how you think about that challenge and ways we can work together to address it and like challenges.
Thank you for your question, Senator Kane. Thanks for the focus on Hampton Roads in particular, but on resilience to changing weather patterns and more extreme weather in general. From our perspective, from an OSD perspective, this starts with enabling the Defense Climate Assessment tool as a tool that military departments can use to identify what their risks are. So the DCAT allows for Navy, Army, Air Force, Space Force, Marines to put in, to use a GIS-based system to be able to say, this is what's happening, these are the projections that we see under high, medium, and low conditions, under this scenario, under this scenario, under this scenario, and then plan accordingly. And I think that one of the things that's been great about the partnership around DCAT is that it's had tangible change, it's produced tangible results, particularly in the Hampton Roads area that Navy has implemented. Beyond that, Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation is another program that reports up through the EI&E office, and they have the ability to resource resilience projects outside the fence line. So understanding that there's a critical interdependence between our ability to complete the mission inside the fence and our reliance on all of the activities that happen outside the fence. DSIP through OLDCC gives us the ability to address some of those challenges.
Very important. I used to feel really nervous about the sea level rise issue in Hampton Roads because I thought, well, if there's ever another BRAC round, this is going to be really tough for us, and it could be. But I mentioned it once to Secretary Gertz, who was the secretary in the previous administration, acquisition and installations. He did a very good job, and he said, look, you're not the only one. Imagine being a base in an area that's subject to drought. Sea level rise is bad, but you got 50, 60,000 people a day on a base living there, working there, contractors in an area where there's persistent drought and challenges with not enough water. That's not an easy one to solve either. There's a lot of challenges that we have in this space, and we got to be creative. There's not enough resources to do it as fast as we want. We got to be creative in dealing with it. So thank you.
I agree, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention wildfire as well as another challenge, a significant and growing challenge for all of our installations.
Yep.
Thank you. I'm going to begin the second round. So just as the members of SASC have been very concerned about our ability to meet the shipbuilding number of ships authorized, there are a lot of us who are also concerned about the state of our shipyards, because it's one thing to build new ships. It's another to make sure that we can maintain and repair the ships we already have. So this is directed to Secretary Berger and also Secretary Owens, that in light of the ongoing concerns that we have about the need to modernize our shipyards, 4 public shipyards, including, of course, a dry dock replacement, especially in my case at Pearl Harbor, we want to make sure that the Navy can ensure that the Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Program, SIOP, is going to continue to be pushed and funded. So this is something that we have been continuing to push, and I just want to note this rather than asking a question about it. I just want the continuing commitment that that is going to happen. Here's a question for all of the witnesses. The safe and timely removal of unexploded ordnance, or UXO, is critical not only for the safe repurposing of land for new military purposes, as we are seeing in locations like Guam, but also for the communities impacted by these sites. It is critical that the DoD take all steps necessary to responsibly turn over land, like at the Waikoloa Maneuver Area, WMA, where families continue to wait to build on Hawaiian homelands for the department to slowly clear the land. And my understanding is that UXO removal is not just a matter of funding. So I'd like to ask whoever wants to comment first. What steps do you need to take to resolve this complex cleanup effort? And when can we expect a resolution on returning specifically the Waikoloa Maneuval area land to the Native Hawaiians? Who wants to take this?
Chairman Hirono, I'd be happy on behalf of the Army to at least start the response to that question with some very good news. Literally on Tuesday, April 11th, General Spellman, who's the Chief Engineer for Army Corps of Engineers, sent me a note with good news that the Pacific Ocean Division of the Army Corps has completed the remedial investigation for the critical area there at Waikoloa with 11,000 acres where these are intended to be returned as Hawaiian homelands. That is the completion of that has been submitted to the Hawaii Department of Health for approval and for comment. I believe on the initial comments, there's been some interaction back and forth with the Hawaii Department of Health. And now that the formal remedial investigation and responses have been submitted, the state has 30 days, we hope, to issue no further action, which will then enable HUD to allow the area to be eligible for mortgages so it can finally be used by the people of Hawaii. So I do have some good news on that front. I know it's been a long haul.
So does that mean that for all of you that you are developing some some kind of way to really move things along on UXO removal, because the need is great. I mean, there are like billions and billions. So there needs to be a much more critical way that you assess how you can meet the needs of the community in terms of this kind of removal. So did you come up with some new way to do this so we can move things along in Waikoloa, for which I am happy to hear the news, by the way?
One thing that's important for us as we engage in the XO removal, particularly in Hawaii, is that we want to make sure we're engaging the local communities so that we're prioritizing the areas that are of most cultural value and otherwise. And we also want the local community to be hired as part of the teams to participate in the XO removal. This takes a little bit of extra training. Obviously, it's highly skilled training in this regard. We're also have some new technology, some new equipment. We'll possibly be using drones and other new equipment where we can identify where that XO is and then more quickly resolve it. But this is one of our top priorities as we look broadly at all of the potential suite of projects that we can accomplish in Hawaii generally, in furtherance, hopefully, of our land retention leases that are expiring in 2029. XO removal is one of the critical top priorities, and the Army Corps of Engineers is very focused on it.
Madam Chair, may I?
Do any of you want to add? Yes.
If I may offer, we released a report just recently looking at environmental cleanup at formerly used defense sites. To give you a sense, there are about a quarter of the costs associated with environmental cleanup at FUDs are related to environmental contaminants like PFAS, but about 3/4 are related to munitions, to include unexploded ordnance. And what we found is that DoD has cleaned up only about 45% of FUD sites contaminated with military munitions, compared to 85% of the FUD sites with hazardous substances and contaminants. And so we have a recommendation to the department to set a target for FUD sites with military munitions to try to get that momentum that you're talking about.
Thank you. I will be very interested in the progress made in this regard. Any of the rest of you want to add to this?
Chair Hirono, the only thing I'd like to add is this top priority, as I get briefed on it. I'm actually coming to Hawaii in the next 9 days, and I'd love to meet with community leaders and discuss this in depth.
Thank you.
Assistant
Sullivan, would you
Secretary Chowdhury, I want to follow up on Senator Shaheen's point and then make another point. What was the phrase again you used? Not 1 ounce of thrust, or what? And unpack that a little bit for me, because I think I agreed wholeheartedly with you, but I don't exactly understand what you were saying. What did you say again?
Senator Sullivan, we've got priorities that we need to meet, national security priorities. When it comes to operational energy, our goal is to reduce demand, to increase agility, to be more agile in the theater. If we can build that agility through drag reduction, through innovations in advanced coatings of engine design, through really leading edge innovations like blended wing body that increase our range, we meet the pacing threat. That's my goal. That's my number one priority. Now, if we get benefits from it as the largest largest user of fossil fuels, that's fantastic. That's great for the climate. We want to support that. But I'm clear-eyed on what my priorities are. And to me, if I'm given the choice between clearing the trees as an aircraft is taking off and the climate, I'm going to take clearing the trees because I know what the crews are going through every single day. So I'm going to support them in that endeavor and make sure that as we go through, there's a lot of puts and takes in this, but we've got to make sure that we've got those priorities set appropriately. But demand reduction is going to be very, very helpful to us with logistics challenges, and we're trying to stretch every mission capability we can in order to improve that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Assistant Secretary Berger, related to that, I just want you guys to be clear, right? Where you're talking about these very aggressive zero-emission light duty, that means electric vehicles for Marines. Are you familiar with the Chosin Reservoir battle in the Korean War? Okay. So it got down to like 30 below zero. Okay, I want to make sure that you guys think through all of these kind of battles. 1st Marine Division surrounded by 120,000 communist Chinese, 30 below zero. Marines did remarkably well. Okay, what I want to make sure is we're not doing some kind of innovation that sounds good in your 2030 climate strategy that ends up hurting the force, that ends up having Marines fighting maybe the North Koreans in 30 below zero and their vehicles don't work because they're EVs and nobody thought about it. Can you make sure you commit that to me? 2027 is right around the corner. And I got really nervous when you get some of the climate zealots who care more about climate action, like the Secretary of the Navy, than war fighting and keeping Marines and sailors and airmen safe, lethal, and ready to win wars. That's what you guys are all about, winning wars. Not net zero 2050 emissions. Has nothing to do with winning wars. So could you make that commitment to me?
Senator Sullivan, absolutely mission comes first, and I'll share with
Mission, not emissions, right? Mission?
Yes, Ranking Member, mission comes first. But I'll share with you just a quick story because the Marines are actually leading in this in quite an impressive way because, as you noted, it's critically important to make sure that they are always going to win. I went out to General Motors with the Commandant just at the end of last year, and this is the conversation that we had with clarity, with focus. That was every question that we had. And we've continued that conversation with industry leaders who are thinking about this, that understand what it means to be forward deployed, competing, and that this is where we gain that advantage.
And lethal, right?
Yes, sir.
That's your mission, lethality.
Yes, sir.
Lethality, that's every one of your missions, correct?
And I'll borrow a phrase that that my colleague here uses, but it applies no matter where we are when we're talking about operational energy, and it's lethality per gallon. And so no matter where we are, how are we getting the most out of every gallon that we're using of whatever it is? And then as we look at other options, it is mission assurance and that lethality as well per megawatt hour, per any way that you are measuring energy, because we want to create that unfair advantage anytime a Marine, anytime a sailor, and I'm confident speaking for my colleagues here for their services, encounters an enemy. It is our job to think about every way to create that competitive advantage, make it unfair so that we are winning every time.
Okay. Assistant Secretary Chowdhury and Assistant Secretary Jacobson, I have I just want a commitment from both of you. You know, we've had this buildup of the Army and particularly the Air Force, particularly in interior Alaska with the 2 squadrons of F-35s. We've had some housing challenges that I know I've spoken to you about, and those are important. There's a lot of kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say blame, but there's a lot of, we weren't fully ready in interior Alaska to fully house the new airmen coming with those 2 squadrons and their families, very importantly. The Air Force and the Army both have certain statutory authorities that they can use with regard to housing. We're still dealing with this. We're still struggling with it a little bit, particularly in interior Alaska. We want to make sure the airmen coming up to Eielson are able to bring their families. That's really, really important to have a good experience. So can I get your commitment to work with me in this committee on using your existing authorities that you have on helping us work through some of the housing challenges, both of you? It's more of the Air Force issue in interior Alaska, but it's a bit of a Army issue at J-Bear and in interior Fort Wainwright as well. Can I get both your commitments to work on base and off base? You have authorities. We need to get on this. We don't want, the Air Force, as you know, is contemplating 1-year unaccompanied tours for the F-35 contingent, and I think we can all agree that would be a disaster. We don't want that, and they don't want that. It's just the challenge of the housing. Can I get your commitment on that?
Senator Sullivan, I've been to Eielson a long time ago as a cadet. I know what it's like there. It is in interior Alaska, one of the most beautiful places on earth, but it's a great place to have a family. And you have my commitment to make sure that we work through this together to come up with the right solution. And if, to me, I err towards accompanied because it's something that I've lived through. Being accompanied with your family is it impacts the mission every single day. And executing that mission is dependent, and a lot of times great that you can come home and spend time with your family rather than being far away, which can wear on the mission. So you have my commitment to work through that and use our existing authorities.
Great. Assistant Secretary.
Yeah, Senator Sullivan, as I say, I'll be there in the next couple of weeks, and I will make sure I get a full assessment of the housing needs. Also, the barracks needs. We are investing in FY24 in barracks, but that
great.
too. And many other investments in Alaska infrastructure, but I will specifically ask about family housing.
Madam Chair, do I have time for one more question?
I'm going to ask one more question, so you go ahead. You ask one
This is my final one, and it's related to the, so in the Army, as you know, in Alaska, we've had this really horrendous surge in service member suicides. And it's just heartbreaking, and it's still continuing. You know, I think the leadership from Secretary Austin, you know, General McConville, the leadership in Alaska are very focused on it. These are, I think, in some ways generational challenges with this generation of men and women serving way beyond our military's capability, but there's still a lot we can do. I think the Army is doing a lot on quality of life issues at places like Eielson that can be very remote and dark in the winter and stuff. So can you just touch on both, again, the Army in terms of Assistant Secretary Jacobson and Assistant Secretary Chowdhury, what you're doing on some of the installation elements of building out morale welfare centers, child care centers, and are you coordinating all with mental health providers on what those kind of facilities can do to address what's actually a real severe crisis in the Army in Alaska right now with regard to suicide?
Senator Sullivan, the suicide is really such a major concern for Army senior leadership, as you know, across the board, and particularly in Alaska because of some of the isolated conditions and otherwise. And we recognize fully the connection between quality of life and morale.
Yeah.
And we are very focused on that particular issue in, as you say, these quality of life facilities, fitness centers, recreation centers, child development centers, to make sure that they accommodate not just the physical need, but the emotional, spiritual, and mental needs of soldiers and families.
Good, thank you. Assistant Secretary Chowdhury, do you have anything to add to that?
Senator Sullivan, all I can say is this is personal to me. I've lost wingmen over this issue.
Yeah.
And so I take it very, very seriously. In fact, there's one of my classmates from the academy who works in the petroleum industry north of Eielson. And so he tells me a little bit about what it's like up there. So making sure we have those facilities taken care of. If I could, I'd like to make sure I stay focused on this issue by taking this back and working with my Manpower and Reserve Affairs counterpart to make sure we address Eielson specifically. Because having visited there a long time ago as a cadet, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I want to address it.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for raising the issue of suicides. I just have one question that I'd like to ask Secretary Owens. The military installations face increasing threats from extreme weather and climate change, and Hurricane Michael in 2018 devastated Tyndall Air Force Base, costing billions to rebuild and continues to impact the readiness of our forces there. In 2019, the GAO found that the DoD was not taking extreme weather projections into account when designing resilient construction projects. Last month's DoD's Inspector General found that DoD does not require resilience consideration in its construction design criteria, and recently this committee received notification that the scope of Army barracks in Alaska needed revision because it did not take into account unique considerations for a facility being located in Arctic conditions. How do you like that?
Well, I go back
like
to
it.
the focus of the Navy, right?
Yeah.
The Navy should be focused on shipbuilding, war fighting. I think it's outrageous. The
Also-
Secretary of the Navy came to the hearing yesterday, totally unprepared. Gets his
How
climate-
about
gets his
livable
climate- gets his-
conditions?
Gets his climate action plan out before anything else. It was pathetic, and it's not what the Navy needs. So
Well-
that's my point, Madam Chair. You
Okay.
can raise
That's,
all your
yeah.
points you want.
Yes, and I will. Well, I think it's taken in totality, because it's not either or. And so the conditions in which our service members live and they operate are very important. And I tell you, with all of the huge climate change issues facing us, you would think that our military and designing installations would not put installations where there's going to be a tsunami, et cetera. So, you know, this is something that I would ask all of you to include in your design. Is that what's happening, Secretary Owens?
Chairman Hirono, yeah. So I mentioned the Defense Climate Assessment Tool earlier, and that is a primary source of data that will allow for the type of resilience planning that you're talking about. But we are developing policy that addresses integrated installation resilience, and we'll be getting that out. That's not to say that it's not happening organically already based on the use of DCAT by the military departments, but we can certainly do better and be more specific in terms of accountability.
Yes, Secretary Jacobson.
Chairman Hirono, that was a big mistake that we didn't plan for Arctic conditions in the design. Thankfully, we hadn't started building the place yet, in those barracks. And part of our FY24 budget is because we had to increase the cost because we had not planned for that. Big mistake, terrible, horrible mistake. And on my watch, it won't happen again. But I'll tell you what we are doing is we're mindful of, we've just delivered a report to Congress as required by the FY23 NDAA on installation resilience, including that we're using installation climate resilience plans to design climate resilient, whatever the climate happens to be, to make sure that whatever we're building is going to be able to withstand those conditions. And the next, we've completed them at Carson and Anniston, but for FY23, Wainwright and Greeley are part of that climate resilience planning. And we're going to do that everywhere, and among many other planning tools that we're going to insist go into all construction design.
And is there that kind of attention and emphasis in the Army, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force? Are you going to design for resilience?
Yes, Senator Hirono, we have two examples that were NDAA mandated. So both San Diego and Parris Island we identified as bases that we were concerned about resilience on and have incorporated planning there. Specifically, as Senator Kane raised earlier, flooding is a problem in Virginia, so as we focus on our building up our public shipyard there and doing that recapitalization, we're actually building to a 300-year floodplain level, vice a 100-year floodplain level. And then I'll note that as we go towards the uniform facility criteria, that set that into the standards. As the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Department of the Navy, I've issued several memos that help to bridge that and make sure that we are including and contemplating these pieces so that not only are we using materials and planning that is sustainable, but also that when we put that dollar down, it counts for what we're making it for.
Secretary Chatterjee?
Chairman Hirono, two examples that come to mind are areas where we've incorporated UFC. One is Tyndall, of course, you just mentioned, and also if you look at Offutt, where we made sure that the runway was built above where it needed to be. But more importantly, as I mentioned earlier, strategy. In our installation investment strategy, we're going to codify that and make sure that we have the right injects so that when we do this across the board, it's institutionalized.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member. This hearing is adjourned. Thank you, each of you, for being here.